Have you ever given your heart to someone, only to have them break it into pieces? Welcome to Twilight Tales, where every story reveals the light and darkness hidden in everyday lives. If you're visiting us for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We bring you real emotions, raw consequences, and unforgettable twists every single week. Today's story asks a question that will leave you thinking long after it ends. What would you do if the child you raised kicked you out of your own home, unaware that you were hiding $9.5 million? Let that sink in. This is the story of Margaret, a quiet, loving woman who gave everything she had, her time, her energy, her unconditional love, to a child she didn't birth, but raised as her own. A boy named Jaden, who entered her life as a broken soul and became her entire world. She taught him how to love, how to trust, how to dream again. And in return, when he got older, he turned his back on her. He told her she didn't belong anymore. He thought she was nothing, just an old woman standing in the way of his success. What he didn't know was that Margaret was never as helpless as she seemed. Because hidden behind her silence, buried beneath years of sacrifice, was a secret, an inheritance worth $9.5 million quietly growing in the shadows. She never flaunted it. She never used it to control him. She just hoped that one day he'd show her love without needing a reward. But when he chose greed over gratitude, selfishness over sacrifice, everything changed. This story is more than just money. It's about loyalty, betrayal, and how the quietest people often carry the loudest lessons. It's about what happens when someone forgets the hands that once held them up, and the consequences of taking love for granted. So stay with us until the very end. Because what Jaden learns, too late, will leave you stunned. And remember, Twilight Tales is where hearts are tested, masks fall, and truths rise. If you're ready for a tale that stirs your soul and makes you question what really matters, hit that like button, share this with someone you care about, and subscribe for more gripping stories that hit home. Now let's begin. Margaret wasn't rich. She didn't wear designer clothes or live in a fancy neighborhood. In fact, her home was a modest two-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, quiet, peaceful, just like her. But what Margaret lacked in wealth, she made up for in something far more valuable: kindness. She had always been that woman. The one who baked extra cookies for the kids down the street. The one who stayed after church to stack chairs. The one who remembered everyone's birthday, even when no one remembered hers. Margaret's life hadn't been easy. She lost her husband early. They tried for years to have children, but fate had other plans. She had made peace with the silence in her home, but the emptiness? That never quite went away. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Margaret had volunteered to help at a local youth center, just a few hours a week. It gave her something to do, a way to stay connected to the world. But she hadn't expected to meet him. Jaden. 7 years old. Small for his age. Big watchful eyes. And a silence that was louder than words. While the other kids laughed and played, Jaden sat alone. He didn't smile. He didn't ask for seconds. He didn't trust anyone. Margaret watched him from across the room. She noticed the way he flinched when someone raised their voice. The way he hoarded snacks in his pocket just in case. The way he looked at the door like he was always ready to run. And something inside her stirred. She tried to talk to him, softly, patiently. At first he said nothing. Days passed. Weeks. But she didn't give up. She brought him little things. A toy car, a warm muffin, a new pair of gloves when his old ones had holes in them. Then one day, Jaden looked up and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first word he ever spoke to her. From that moment on, something shifted. He started sitting beside her during story time. He let her hold his hand while crossing the street. And slowly, Margaret realized this boy, this quiet, wounded child, had crawled into the hollow places of her heart and made himself at home. When the social worker mentioned that Jaden was bouncing between foster homes, Margaret didn't hesitate. She took him in. Everyone said she was crazy. She was too old, too alone, too unprepared. But Margaret didn't care. Love doesn't need permission, just needs a chance. And so Margaret became a mother. Not by blood, but by choice. And in her eyes, that made it even more powerful. At first, things weren't easy. Jaden had nightmares, tantrums, moments when he'd push her away. But Margaret never stopped reaching for him. She tucked him in every night. She packed his lunch with handwritten notes. She sat through school meetings, doctor visits, therapy sessions. She didn't do it for praise. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because, for the first time in years, she had someone to love again. And even though she didn't know it then, Margaret was planting seeds. Seeds that would grow into joy and pain, loyalty and betrayal. But in that moment, all she saw was a boy who needed her, and a heart finally full again. At first, Jaden barely spoke above a whisper. But with time, that whisper became laughter. Margaret remembered the first time he called her Mom. They were at the park. He was climbing a jungle gym and a kid nearby pushed him too hard. Jaden lost his balance and scraped his knee. He looked around, scared, and then his eyes locked on her. Mom, he cried out without even thinking. Margaret rushed to him, knelt beside him, and hugged him tight. But in her heart, she was crying for a different reason. That one word meant everything. Over the years, their bond grew stronger. Margaret gave Jaden structure, support, and something he never had before: stability. For the first time in his life, he had a room of his own, clean clothes, and warm meals he didn't have to fight for. But beyond that, he had safety. Well, someone to show up at his school play with flowers, even if he only had one line. Someone who sat at the dinner table every night and asked about his day, whether it was good or bad. They had routines: pancake Saturdays, evening walks, crossword puzzles before bed. Margaret read to him every night even when he pretended not to care. She gave him the words he didn't know how to say. And little by little, Jaden started to bloom. He did well in school. Teachers praised his progress. He made friends. He started smiling in photos. He even joined the basketball team in middle school, and Margaret never missed a game. She cheered loudest from the stands, clutching a thermos of hot cocoa, wearing his number on her scarf like he was an NBA star. People in the neighborhood started calling them inseparable. She's turned that boy around, they'd say. He's lucky to have her. And Margaret would smile, but deep down she always thought, no, I'm the lucky one. Jaden became her world. Every decision, every dollar, every ounce of energy went into making sure he had a future brighter than anything she'd ever known. On Jaden's 16th birthday, Margaret surprised him with a used car. It wasn't fancy, but it ran smooth. He was stunned. I don't deserve this, he said. But Margaret just smiled and replied, you deserve so much more. In that moment, anyone looking from the outside would have believed theirs was the perfect mother-son story. Proof that love could overcome any obstacle. That time could heal old wounds. And for a while, it really did seem that way. Jaden even started calling her Mom without hesitation. Introduced her proudly to friends. Hugged her in public. He made her Mother's Day cards by hand with scribbled poems and awkward drawings. They had a rhythm, a trust, a bond so strong it felt unbreakable. But sometimes, when love is given too freely, it gets taken for granted. And as Jaden grew older, taller, stronger, and more aware of the world, something began to shift. It was subtle at first. A rolled eye. A missed curfew. A sarcastic comment when she reminded him to say grace before dinner. Margaret noticed but brushed it off. He was becoming a young man, that's all. Teenagers go through phases. She had no idea that behind his quiet changes, something darker was growing. And the boy she raised with endless love would soon become the one to break her heart. By the time Jaden reached high school, the world had started whispering to him. Whispers that said he didn't need to live in a small house with hand-me-downs. Whispers that said he was too good for his quiet, frugal lifestyle. And worse, whispers that told him Margaret was holding him back. At first the changes were small. He stopped joining her for evening walks. He wore his headphones at the dinner table. He spent hours locked in his room, talking to people she didn't know. Margaret knocked softly on his door one night, asking if he wanted to play cards like they used to. I'm not a kid anymore, he said flatly, not even looking up from his phone. She smiled gently, trying to keep the peace. But in her heart, she felt something unravel. Then came the clothes. Suddenly, Jaden cared about brands, expensive shoes, designer jackets, gold chains. He began criticizing her for how she dressed, calling her style old-fashioned and embarrassing. He hated the beat-up car she drove. He stopped inviting friends over, ashamed of their modest home. Margaret tried to talk to him. Jaden, money doesn't make a man, she said softly, setting down a plate of food he never touched. Easy for you to say, he snapped. You're not the one getting laughed at every day. It was the first time he'd raised his voice at her. And it wouldn't be the last. The more he chased attention, the more he drifted. He began staying out late without explanation. His grades slipped. He skipped church. He even started dating someone older, a girl who openly mocked Margaret whenever she saw her. You let her talk to me like that? Margaret once asked him, barely holding back tears. Jaden shrugged. Maybe if you acted less weird, she wouldn't. Still, she didn't stop loving him. She tried reaching out, offering to help him with school, to talk about his dreams, to make his favorite meals. But he pushed her away every time, rolling his eyes, mumbling that she was too much. Then one night he came home smelling like alcohol. Margaret waited up, worried sick. "You promised me," she said as he stumbled in. "You said you'd never drink." He scoffed. "You're not my real mom, remember? You don't get to control me." That sentence hit harder than any slap could. He had never said those words before. Not in anger. Not in coldness. Not like that. Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, heart breaking piece by piece, but she still whispered, "I love you." And Jaden? He just walked past her, like she wasn't even there. The silence between them grew louder after that. He stopped calling her Mom. He started using her first name. "Margaret, I need money. Margaret, I'm going out. Margaret, don't wait up." He wasn't a boy anymore. He was growing into a man. But not the kind Margaret had hoped for. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pull him back. One evening he came home furious. He'd been rejected from a college scholarship. He blamed her for not having the connections, the money, the status to push him forward. "I deserve better," he shouted. "I could have had everything if I didn't grow up poor." He stormed out, slamming the door, leaving Margaret trembling on the couch, her heart screaming with the words she couldn't say aloud. "I gave you everything I had. Was it never enough?" But deep inside she already knew. The boy she had loved unconditionally was starting to disappear. Jaden turned 21 on a Sunday. Margaret baked him a chocolate cake from scratch, his favorite since he was 8. She placed candles gently on top, wrapped a second-hand watch she'd saved up for, and waited at the kitchen table, alone. Jaden never came home. Hours later she got a text. "Out with friends? Don't wait up." "No, thank you." "No, love you." Just silence. It wasn't the first time he'd disappointed her. But this time, it felt final. A week later, Jaden came home in an unusually good mood. His tone was sweeter. He helped her carry groceries. Even called her Mom again. Margaret's heart lit up. Maybe, just maybe, her son was still in there. Then he sat her down and said, "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." She smiled. "Of course, dear. Anything." He leaned forward. "You've lived in this house your whole life, right?" She nodded. "Yes. Since before your father passed. He built the garden out back with his own hands." Jaden chuckled. "It's a nice place, but it's getting old. I was thinking, maybe we should put it in my name." Margaret blinked. "Why would we do that?" "Well, I'm the one who'll inherit it anyway," he shrugged. "This way I can help manage things now. Make upgrades. Maybe use it to secure a small business loan. You trust me, right?" Margaret hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to pause. But after everything, after raising him from nothing, after all the pain, they were finally talking again. So she said yes. She signed the papers. And just like that, the house was no longer hers. For a few days things felt normal. Jaden stayed home more often. He acted polite, even respectful. Then one morning she woke to find a suitcase by the door. "What's this?" she asked, confused. Jaden didn't even look at her as he sipped his coffee. "I think it's time for you to move out," he said calmly. "The house feels crowded. I need space. And, honestly, you're not exactly easy to live with." Margaret's hands trembled. "You're joking." "I'm not," he said. "I found a nice place for you, a small unit at a senior residence across town. They've got nurses and everything. It'll be good for you." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her heart raced. Her chest tightened. "Jaden, this is my home." He finally met her eyes. Not anymore. The silence in that room could have shattered glass. Margaret stood frozen. Her whole life had played out inside those walls. Every Christmas, every birthday, every night she stayed up rocking him through fevers, night terrors, tears. Now she was being dismissed like a burden. And the boy she once cradled in her arms was looking at her like she was nothing. Still, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply packed her things. Quietly. Dignified. Tears silently sliding down her cheeks. Jaden didn't help her carry a single bag. Neighbors saw her leave and asked where she was going. She simply smiled and said, "A new chapter." He told them she chose to move out. He told them it was her decision. But the truth? Jaden had taken everything from her and hadn't looked back. In his mind, she was old, finished, unnecessary. He was moving up in the world. Throwing lavish parties. Posting photos online, posing with people who barely knew his name. And Margaret? She sat quietly in a small, single-room unit at a senior home. Surrounded by strangers, staring at old photo albums filled with memories Jaden no longer cared to remember. Yet still, despite the heartbreak, she didn't curse him, didn't expose him, didn't tell anyone what really happened, because deep down, she still loved him. But Jaden's betrayal would come with a price. Because what he didn't know, what he never thought to ask, was that Margaret had been keeping a secret. A secret bigger than any house, any inheritance, any plan he thought he had. And soon, he would learn just how much he had thrown away. Margaret's new room was small. A single bed. A chair by the window. A dresser that creaked when she opened it. But she never complained. She planted flowers on the windowsill. She baked cookies for the nurses. She smiled when the other residents asked about her past, even when her heart ached with memories she dared not speak aloud. Everyone assumed she was just another sweet old woman with no family left. And Margaret let them believe that. She didn't talk about Jaden. She didn't explain why he never visited. She didn't bring up the house she no longer owned. Instead, she poured herself into quiet kindness the same way she always had. But beneath her soft smiles, she held on to something powerful. A secret. You see, years ago, before Jaden turned 18, Margaret had made a decision. A private one, carefully hidden behind years of sacrifice. After her husband died, Margaret inherited a sum from his life insurance and some old land her father had once owned. She never spoke of it. Never bragged. Instead, she invested quietly. A little here, a little there. Bonds. Property. Time. And as the years passed, the money grew. By the time Jaden turned 21, Margaret's hidden fortune had reached $9.5 million. But she never used it. Not for herself. Not even for Jaden. Because she believed in something deeper than wealth. She believed in building character. She once told her lawyer, if he grows into a man who respects others and values love over money, then he'll deserve it. If not, then he's already rich in the one thing that matters most, freedom. So, she kept the fortune in a trust, protected and silent, with strict instructions. It was not to be touched, not even revealed, unless her will determined the time was right. Jaden never asked questions about her finances. He just assumed she was poor. That her frugal ways were because she had no other choice. He never wondered why she never seemed to worry about bills. Why she never needed a second job. Why she donated quietly to the youth center every year, even when things seemed tight. He never saw her visit the lawyer's office once a year. Never noticed the brown envelope she kept hidden in a locked drawer. Because in his eyes, she was just old Margaret. But the truth? She was far more than that. In the retirement home, Margaret continued her quiet life. She taught other seniors how to bake. She wrote letters to children at the youth center. She never spoke ill of Jaden, not once. But every night, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the moon rise, her thoughts drifted to the boy she had raised, the boy she had once believed in more than anything. She wondered if he would ever change. If he would ever come back not for money, but for her. He never did. And with each passing year, Margaret grew older, her body weaker, her steps slower. But her mind? Sharp as ever. She had already made arrangements, signed the documents, appointed the lawyer, written the letters. Everything was set. Jaden thought he had taken everything from her. But in truth, Margaret had given him only what she wanted to. And she had saved the rest for something far more important. Because she knew that true wealth means nothing if it ends up in the wrong hands. And Jaden's hands? Were about to learn that the hard way. Jaden thought he had it all. With the house in his name, the freedom to come and go as he pleased and no one to answer to, he felt like a king. The very first weekend Margaret was gone, he threw a party. Music shaking the walls, strangers drinking from bottles they couldn't even pronounce. He strutted through his own living room like a man who had finally arrived. People called him boss. He soaked in the attention. But beneath the flashing lights and staged selfies, reality was already cracking. He had no job, just temporary gigs he never stayed in. The money Margaret used to carefully budget disappeared faster than he could count. He upgraded the furniture, bought designer clothes, leased a flashy car with monthly payments he couldn't afford. He even quit community college, saying he'd rather be an entrepreneur. College is for people who want to work for someone else, he told his friends, most of whom were just there for the open bar and Wi-Fi. But without Margaret, the foundation holding his life together was gone. The mortgage? He didn't realize property taxes weren't optional. The utilities? He ignored the bills. The car? Repossessed in 3 months. Jaden started borrowing money from friends, but they quickly caught on. The party invitations stopped. His phone rang less. Even the girlfriend who once mocked Margaret walked away, calling him a wannabe with mommy issues. Still, Jaden blamed everyone but himself. He blamed the system. He blamed the economy. He even blamed Margaret, telling anyone who'd listen that she left him with nothing. And yet he never once thought to ask, why? Margaret's absence became louder than her presence ever was. The house began to fall apart. The garden died. Dust collected on the photo frames he never looked at. And then came the final blow. One morning he opened the front door and found a foreclosure notice nailed to the frame. He was being evicted. 3 months behind on payments. No savings. No support. Just like that, the house he had taken from the only person who ever loved him was gone. Jaden sat alone in the living room that night, surrounded by empty bottles and broken dreams. No music. No friends. No family. Just silence. For the first time in years he picked up an old photo album Margaret had left behind. One he used to ignore. Page after page he saw her smiling, holding him at the beach, clapping at his school play, kissing his forehead while he slept. He saw a life he no longer deserved. And for the first time something inside him cracked, not with anger but with regret. He whispered, "I'm sorry." But Margaret couldn't hear him. Because while he was spiraling, alone and angry, she had faded quietly from this world, without a single call from the boy she once called son. Jaden never visited her. Never asked where she went. Never offered a word of gratitude. And now it was too late. Or so he thought. Until a knock came at his door. Not a friend. Not a debt collector. But a man in a suit, holding an envelope, and a name Jaden hadn't heard in months. "Are you Jaden Wilson?" "Yeah." "Who's asking?" "My name is Charles Monroe. I'm your mother's attorney." Jaden froze. "Your mother?" "Yes," the man said softly. "Margaret. She left something behind. And you need to hear what it is." Jaden blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. A mother?" The lawyer, Charles Monroe, gave a quiet nod. "Yes. Margaret Wilson. She passed away 2 weeks ago." Jaden's mouth opened, but no words came out. He hadn't even known she was gone. Suddenly the room felt smaller. The silence heavier. He sat down slowly, and the lawyer handed him a sealed envelope. "This is from her," Charles said. "She wrote it a year ago. I was instructed to deliver it to you personally, after her passing." Jaden turned the envelope over. Her handwriting. Neat. Familiar. Somehow, still full of grace. His hands trembled as he opened it. "My dearest Jaden, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. I hope life has been kind, though my heart fears it hasn't." Tears welled in his eyes. "You were the greatest gift I ever received. Not from blood but from choice. I chose you when the world gave up on you. And for many years I believed you were becoming the kind of man who would honor that love. I was wrong. But I never stopped loving you." Jaden felt his chest tighten. His eyes dropped to the next line. "I never told you about the money because I didn't want wealth to shape your character. I wanted to see who you'd become on your own. I had hoped you'd grow into a man who valued people over power and loyalty over pride." His breath caught. "What money?" The lawyer interrupted his thoughts gently. "She left behind a trust fund. $9.5 million. Accumulated through investments, land inheritance, and years of savings. All under her name." Jaden's jaw dropped. "She had that kind of money? All this time?" Charles nodded. "Yes. She never touched it. She lived modestly by choice." Jaden leaned back, stunned. He had thrown her out, called her a burden, while she sat on a fortune? He turned back to the letter. "I wanted to tell you. So many times. But every time I saw you chasing what glitters instead of what matters, I decided to wait. And in the end I realized something. If I gave you the money it would destroy you. And if I withheld it, maybe, just maybe, you'd find your own strength." Jaden's eyes blurred with tears. "So here is what I've done. The trust is not for you. It has been donated to the youth center where we first met. To children who remind me of the boy you used to be, before the world taught you to take instead of give. But I haven't left you with nothing." Charles handed him a second envelope. Inside was a key, and a note. "This key opens a small safety deposit box. Inside you'll find old letters, photos, and something that meant the world to me, the first crayon drawing you ever gave me. You called it home. That, Jaden, is my final gift to you. Not money. Not property. Love. The kind that doesn't come with a price tag." Jaden collapsed forward, sobbing. Everything he thought mattered, status, money, power, meant nothing now. He'd thrown away the only person who had ever truly believed in him. And in the end she gave him not a penny, but a mirror. One that reflected exactly who he had become. The lawyer stood, silent for a moment. "She didn't hate you, Jaden. She just hoped you'd find your way." even if it wasn't through her fortune. Jaden wiped his face, barely able to breathe. He had lost her. He had lost everything. And yet, somehow the thing that haunted him most wasn't the money. It was her final sentence. If you've read this far, it means there's still a part of you worth saving. I just hope you choose to save it, before it's too late. Jaden sat in silence long after the lawyer had gone. The letter rested in his lap, soft and wrinkled from his trembling hands. But the words, those words carved themselves into his soul. He thought about every moment he'd taken for granted. The meals, the hugs, the sleepless nights Margaret spent waiting up for him. The way she'd always said, "I love you," even when he didn't deserve it. He thought about the house, the parties, the night he kicked her out without a second thought. And now he thought about the woman who had died alone, still loving him. But it wasn't guilt that broke him. It was the truth. Margaret had loved him purely, selflessly, without conditions. And he had returned that love with betrayal. Not because she was weak, but because he was. He drove to the youth center the next day. He didn't tell them who he was. He just watched as kids played, laughed, and learned, under a new roof with her name carved in a gold plaque above the door, Margaret Wilson Children's Center. He broke down in his car afterward, crying like a child again, realizing, maybe for the first time in his life, what it meant to love someone, and lose them forever. And yet, in her final act, Margaret had given him one more chance, not through money but through memory. The drawing he made as a little boy, the one titled Home, was still there, preserved in the safety deposit box. Faded crayon colors, uneven letters, but somehow more valuable than gold. It was the reminder that once, before the pride, before the greed, he had been good. That maybe, deep down, he still could be. Not everyone gets a second chance. But Jaden knew now that it was never too late to change. Only too late to apologize. He started volunteering at the youth center. Quietly. Humbly. No spotlight. No applause. He spoke to kids who felt abandoned, angry, lost. And when they asked why he was there, he simply said, "Because someone once chose to love me when I didn't deserve it." He never touched Margaret's fortune, because it was never his to begin with. But what he did carry every day was the weight of her love, and the promise to become a man she could finally be proud of. So, what would you do if someone you loved betrayed you? Would you seek revenge? Or, would you choose silence and let life be the teacher? Margaret chose love, painful, quiet, unwavering love. And in doing so, she gave Jaden a lesson more powerful than money ever could. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't wealth. It's who you were when no one was watching. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If it moved you, if it made you think, even just for a moment, please. Speech balloon, leave a comment below. What would you have done in Margaret's shoes? Thumbs up, like this video. Repeat button, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Pushpin, and most importantly, subscribe to Twilight Tales, where every story dares to ask the question, what's hidden beneath the surface of everyday lives? Until next time, stay kind, stay human. And remember, the quietest stories often echo the loudest.